I still feel kind of a genuine excitement for the material that I cover. Even I am a creature of habit. I do a lot of the same stuff. I make a lot of the same jokes in the same places and all of that. But I'm like excited to go to work, and I'm excited to talk to students about this stuff that excites me.
You just heard Don Christensen from Shoreline Community College in Shoreline, Washington. Garth interviewed Don for episode 224 of Psych Sessions, Conversations About Teaching and Stuff.
Psych Sessions is sponsored by W.W. Norton. Are you looking for more activities to promote scientific literacy? ZAPS 3.0 interactive labs from W.W. Norton are brief, hands-on activities that invite students to actively participate in the process of psychological research and discovery. Utilizing a consistent 5-part framework and incorporating transparent design principles, students experience classic psychological studies like the Stroop effect, false memory, the serial position effect, signal detection, and more. Once they've completed the experiment, students can compare their data with national data and their own classmates, offering the opportunity for rich in-class or online discussions. Bring the science of psychology to life for your students with ZAPS. For Psych Sessions listeners new to ZAPS, you can try it for free the next time you teach. Just go to siegel.wwnorton.com/Psych Sessions, and the folks at W.W. Norton will even integrate it into your LMS for you. That is Siegel, like the bird, SEAGULL.wwnorton.com/Psych Sessions. Psych Sessions is proud to partner with Macmillan Learning. At Macmillan Learning Psychology, content matters, and these days, digital content matters more than ever. Macmillan Learning's Achieve elevates interactive teaching and learning with an extraordinary range of online course content in a powerful yet easy-to-use platform. Interactive ebooks, innovative assessments, engaging videos and activities, helpful instructor resources. Achieve brings it all together and makes it easy for you to find what you need and what you want. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/Psych Sessions for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning.
Hi, my name is Brooke Wisenhunt, and I'm from Missouri State University. And one of the things that excites me about STP is that I feel like that is where I found my professional home. After spending a lot of years going to other professional academic conferences, I landed at a conference full of people from STP and really felt like this was the place that were my people. And I think that that's something that you can miss out on if you don't join this organization. So go to teachpsych.org and please join and become one of these people that is a member of our community.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Psych Sessions. I am here just probably a few miles away from Don Christensen from Shoreline Community College. I'm at Cascadia College. We're both in North Seattle. Don, do you live close to the college where you teach?
I live kind of in North Kirkland, just by Evergreen Hospital there. So I'm very close to Cascadia.
We're closer to each other's institutions is what's happening here.
Okay.
But you have been, I think you have been at your institution long enough that you're probably not thinking about leaving right now.
I hope it's the only job I've ever had. I mean, I'm quite happy there. I'd love to surf it all the way to retirement. So. No,
it's of course I was doing my due diligence. I know you a little bit, and but today I was looking on your LinkedIn profile, and it looks like you've been at Shoreline since 2001. Is that possible?
Yes, I think I graduated from the UW in 2000, and I decided to wade into community college teaching. And probably the backstory here's there's teaching in my family. My mom was a community college teacher. She taught at Shoreline for about 30 years. She taught engineering. So she was kind of probably wondering what the heck I was doing. But when I graduated, she found a psych colleague. I don't know if you know Bob Thompson at Shoreline. She reached out to him and said, my son's needs a job. Can you talk to him and give him some advice? And so we went and got tacos. And he was really helpful and had a lot of good insights. And then about 3 or 4 months later said, hey, we have a personality class that we don't have staffed. Would you be interested? And that's where I started with them.
Wow. Thanks, Mom. That's awesome.
Yes. I know the rumor was there was another psychology colleague who was screaming nepotism when I was brought on board, although he later became a very good friend and colleague too. So
yeah. Your mom got you that job, didn't she? No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's so interesting, Don. I'm actually really excited to talk to you today because and it has been you've been on my radar forever, and I'm glad we finally pulled it off. Because I don't know, man, when you meet some people, you just feel like sometimes like, oh, we get each other. Like we talk about teaching the same way. We both have a foot into like applied psych in the professional world a little bit. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about that today. But if I could just tell people my story with Don is that, and let me take a quick just like detour, because when I was saying 2001, and then seemed like I was flabbergasted. It's not because you're so old. That could have been what it sounded like. But then I was sitting here thinking like I had my first teaching job in California around 2004, I think. So we're probably closer than I think. And then I came to Highline in South Seattle in 2008. Okay. But I don't know if you know any of my story, Don, but basically trained as a therapist, decided to go teach. And you were trained as a sports psychologist, right?
Yes, and clinical psychologist. So we can talk about it more. I mean, I'll get you back to your story in a moment, but I was in the adult clinical program at the UW, and that was my main focus for my PhD. And then I had a sports psychology minor because I worked with 2 sports psychologists who were there. So we have that commonality. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. So then I had this weird thing happen when I moved to Seattle that I got 2 job offers. It's a little more complex than this, but it makes for the best story if I just tell it simply, which is I had like the ideal counseling job. Like they were going to let me do whatever I wanted, like my theoretical orientation. They were just going to provide space. It was going to be this great place. And then I got also a 1-year contract at Highline College. And it was like fork in the road, pick one. And I ended up picking Highline College. Okay. They both paid terribly, equally terribly. So, that 9-month contract was a lot better for me at that time. But, I was so naive to higher education, first generation college student. I didn't know what I was doing as a psychology professor, as a teacher. I was maybe growing very, very slowly. Great mentors there, but I don't know how mentorable I was at that time. And so, so I had some conversations with somebody like Sue Franz, Ruth Frickel over there, and at some point they kind of just gave me the impression that I wasn't cutting it really, like that there was something that I needed to, like in a nice mentor way, like holding you to account, right? Like you need to grow as a teacher, basically. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to start doing that. And I'm going to start looking for full-time jobs. I'm going to go do this, and couldn't get an interview. And then I realized that I needed to find a way around it. And that's when I started Tip Northwest. I needed to find some way to separate myself from the other kind of more competitive folks who might be doing other things pretty well. And so then I started Tip Northwest. Okay, so this is the longest story ever to get to the point.
This is interesting. Maybe I should be interviewing you.
maybe not for my audience. Maybe they know it already. But then I saw these names start to. First of all, I was so appreciative for every person on the roster who would come out to my new conference, Tip Northwest. But I saw this name pop up year after year, again and again. Don Christensen. I'm like, this guy's our biggest supporter. But at that point, it was a sea of faces. So you just kind of, on that day, I'm in the weeds and I don't know who's who. But over the years, man, you have been present. And so I've always wanted to ask, what was it or what is it that makes you show up to these professional development opportunities in the region?
I think what you offered was just something that was just ridiculously convenient. And then the quality of it, I think, was like this unexpected bonus of, oh my God, this is great stuff. Because to be fair, I don't really do much of the national conference scene. I kind of did more of that in grad school. But once I was teaching, I kind of shied away from it. But I think there was a part of me thinking kind of like the nudges you got when you were at Highline of like, I need to grow. What are the edges here? And when I saw how convenient it was, I was like, I can go to Highline. I mean, that was my very first job before Shoreline. So I think I taught a night class at Highline in the winter of 2001. And then I knew they were hiring for a position. And I'm like, well, I'm just out of graduate school. I probably won't get the job, but, I'll probably get an interview. And I got nothing. And I think I know who was in that pool. I think it was Sue Franz. So I kind of, the deck was stacked from the very beginning. But yeah, that was my very first community college job, was teaching there in the evenings.
Yeah. Yeah. Hiring is different now, isn't it, than it was back then? Like post pandemic. I don't know what you're seeing out there, but on
our end, I mean, it's kind of gone a weird direction. I think for my job, my colleagues have told me they had like over 100 applicants or 80 applicants back when I was hired for my tenure track position. And I naively, so I had taught at Shoreline for a couple of years part-time. I had created 2 courses for them. The UW had just made their program shift, and they made biopsych and research methods prerequisites for the major.
Yep.
And I had done all kinds of work with methods when I was a grad student. I can talk more about that later, maybe, if you ask. And then I figured out how to teach biopsych. You talked about trying to find the edge. I'm like, well, if I could teach this class, maybe this would give me an advantage. So I created it for Shoreline and proposed it. And so when they posted the position a couple of years later after I was teaching there, said, we're looking for somebody to teach biopsych and research methods. And I'm like, yes, this is good. Okay. And I'm like, they're creating the position for me. And then I later learned that in my pool, there was a person who later became one of my colleagues. He was from NYU. He was a student of Joseph Ledoux. He had a PhD in experimental psychology and a background in neuroscience. And so he was better suited for those 2 classes than I was. I don't quite get how I was picked. And then also in that pool, I know there was a professor from the University of Washington who was applying as well. And I think I'm lucky I didn't know who was in that pool, because I kind of felt comfortable going in. I think I presented myself pretty well. And thank goodness in the long run it worked out. And I've been there ever since. But we have the Highline thread.
Oh, man. So. See, I knew it. I knew there were more than the threads that we've even discovered together. But it's really interesting. Every once in a while, I'll be at a regional conference or something like that, and somebody from whatever school that I applied at some point says, and this is probably after I was competitive, and they'll spill the beans on like what happened, because there's drama, right? And you've been on hiring committees. A bunch of people want this person, a bunch of people want the other person. They're talking about it. I have a colleague now, Seraphine Shen Miller, who is an amazing teacher and an amazing person as well. And I feel like we were interviewing at Cascadia at the same time. And I think it was a coin flip, to be honest. And then we both ended up there. So now she's my one and only colleague there. So
that's kind of what happened with the colleague I mentioned. So I was picked first, and then another colleague who actually founded Shoreline in like 66 kind of retired in the middle of the year. And we went, what? And because we had that pool still open, they pulled the other colleague in, and he was my colleague for several years. I loved picking his brain. He left with the economic downturn. He was concerned about a RIF, and so he chose to leave instead of sticking around. I miss him.
Yeah,
he's landed on his feet, but it was tough to see him go.
Yeah. Another point here is that when I interviewed at Cascadia College, I was well aware, because Highline had done so much, had mentored me on classroom advising. I was aware of the UW requirements, and Cascadia did not have a biopsych course or a research methods course when I came. And it's one of the things I said at the interview. I said, hey, have you all thought about this? Because you're missing out on transfer students if you can't offer these courses. And so maybe, it's weird the things you pick up along the way, but I'm just deeply grateful for them. I'm sure you are too. Yeah. So anyway, Don, so you have, you've been to a number of the TIP Northwest conferences.
Yep.
And you've been teaching.
I should have used my tip glass. Now that I think about it, I have tip glasses in my kitchen still.
What else? What is the tip swag?
I won in a raffle. It was under the seat and pick the number thing. And I think I came up and I got to give the gift to somebody else. That was one of your deals that you had that day.
Amazing. And you must have other swag from us. You got t-shirts.
I've got mugs. I got a water bottle. I think I have your sticker on my door at work. You kind of have this silvery TIP Northwest sticker that I was like, oh, that looks good. I'll throw that out there too.
You see, folks, you need people like Don Christensen in your community. That's for sure. Don, have you ever presented with good swag? Have you ever presented at TIP?
I don't think I have. No.
Yeah. Okay. Is that not something you're interested in doing? I'm just trying to no pressure. I mean, a little bit of pressure, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not directing the conference anymore. So.
I'm probably by inclination. I'm a little more of a watcher than a doer. I did I think this may have been just, I was in the tenure process. I remember did you ever attend? I think it was called the Northwest Great Teachers Conference.
No. What was that?
I don't know if it's still around. It was down along the Columbia River. And there was a president of maybe Spokane Falls who coordinated it. And it was at a retreat center, beautiful retreat center with really great food. And I remember one of the things we had to come to the conference with was something to share, like a tool we had picked up or acquired in our teaching, and we had to distribute stuff and present on it. So I did at that, and that was the expectation or the norm there.
Right.
I think my default clinician, probably my comfort zone, is a little more, let me hear what others are doing and kind of watch. But I'm open to a nudge. So we'll talk.
That's great. That's great.
I think as I reflect on my teaching, I'm sort of old schoolish. I'm a classic lecturer, and I'm still figuring out how to do more than that.
Yeah.
So at times when I see cutting edge teaching, I'm kind of like, oh, wow, I see what I should be doing, but I'm not sure what I have as much to offer tangentially in that way.
Can I ask you a question? And we can cut this if you don't like it. But
sure.
When you say I'm an old school lecturer, like what's the emotion behind that? And I'll just say that kind of the way that I talk about lecturing with people now these days is that, I mean, just like any teaching method, there are very good ways to do things and there are very bad ways to do things. Yeah. But do you feel like there's stigma around that old school lecturing?
I think maybe a little bit. And I'm also, I have a new colleague here. We know her, Madeline Gorgeous, and she's going through the tenure process. And to be fair, I am dumbstruck at how skilled and proficient she is.
Yeah.
So I see the different things she does beyond what I do, and it inspires me. And it was funny when she interviewed, and we had another really excellent candidate interview. Both my colleague Bob Thompson and I changed our classes just after seeing what the people in the interviews were doing. We're like, we need to get a little more with the times here. And I still feel that way.
Do you remember what that thing was, what you changed off the top of your head?
I think some of what I did is I went back to your work with the Introductory Psych Initiative and trying to come back to pillars and a little bit more less is more.
Yeah.
Kind of trying to strip the course down a little bit.
Yep.
I've also, I think to begin with, when I was teaching, my courses were very heavily weighted on exams. I always kind of looked longingly at math classes, like seeing the regular homework they had, and my courses didn't have that. I think the whole online stuff that's there now, like I think we use Macmillan, all of that. Sorry, here I'm getting do not disturbs, but messages coming through there.
You're fine. You're fine.
So that online piece was still in development. And I remember having a handful of things before my test, but not much. And now what I really like about now is I have a lot more activities other than tests that my students are doing. And I try to kind of weight the course a little more towards some of that, while still wanting to see what they can do on a traditional test. But there's more to it than that. And so that was kind of me early on, looking for more of that richness. And then I think, I don't want to blow my own horn too much, I think I'm a fairly engaging presenter. I think I come across well in public speaking.
Well, we wouldn't know at Tip Northwest, but you know.
That's right, because you haven't seen it, because I'm quietly watching in the fifth row.
Yeah, no, sorry to interrupt.
I think I'm a decent presenter. I think I have pretty good public speaking skills. I guess, this gets back to the Intro Psych Academy that you put on for us in last year in Portland. Thank you again to you and Regan for doing that excellent conference. I'm still thinking about things we talked about there. One of the things that I do think more intentionally about in recent years is this idea of trying to convey my enthusiasm for this material. And I think that's one of the main things maybe I have to offer in the classroom. And I hope that even if I am, quote unquote, a traditional lecturer, that enthusiasm still shows. 20 plus years in, I still feel kind of a genuine excitement for the material that I cover. Even I am a creature of habit. I do a lot of the same stuff. I make a lot of the same jokes in the same places and all of that. But I'm like excited to go to work, and I'm excited to talk to students about this stuff that excites me.
Yeah.
And so I you were working on us with mission statements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of enthusiasm was one of the words that we kind of came to that's in mine. And so, I'd like to hope that makes what could be viewed as a less than effective method maybe a little more impactful. Yeah? Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? From sort of the IPA philosophy, as long as you're doing something that is, careful and, I guess, evidence informed, the enthusiasm, the authenticity is really what makes for a good teacher. We don't remember teachers from our childhood and even undergraduate days who were the smartest people or had the best teaching methodology. Really, I think you remember their authenticity.
Yeah,
is what sticks out to you, right? And so we're asking new questions now, right? It used to be like, what content can I get my students to remember? I think that's fallen down the ladder a few rungs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So enthusiasm, huh? Okay.
As I was thinking about today, I thought you might ask, how did I get into psychology and teaching? And
let's go.
What you just said there. So both my parents were engineers. My mom taught engineering, and through high school, I was strong in math and science. I did AP physics. I did AP calculus. I came in with those credits to college, and I started engineering when I was in college. And I did play competitive golf in college as well, which was a bit of a juggling demand with the demands of engineering. And to be fair, as I took stock of it all, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to successfully juggle both of those things. But I think what also happened was I bumped into some teachers kind of sequentially across quarters who there was like this spark or enthusiasm that sort of hit me. And I was taking kind of non-engineering prereq courses to break up my quarterly schedule. At my university, we called them fuzzy and techie classes. So that the techie classes and then the softer psych stuff potentially was the fuzzy stuff.
Yeah.
And I still remember my intro psych professor. I can't remember his name. I think he was a guest lecturer from the University of Missouri. And every day, last name might have been Arkin, but I've tried to look him up and I struggled. I couldn't find him because
All right, listeners, here you go. It might have been Arkin from Missouri. So reach out if you.
This would have been at Stanford in like 1987, something like that. And every day he had me laughing in the aisles. He was so funny, so humorous, and really infused his presentation of psychology with that it just hooked me. And to be honest, I didn't do that well in the class. I think I got a D on my first test, which shocked the hell out of me because I was a strong student. I'm like, what is this? Huh. And I worked pretty hard. I think I got like a B or a B plus in intro psych, something I remind my own students of about how hard intro can be just with the scope of what we're trying to cover. But he kind of made psych really pop for me. I mean, I was primed because I was interested in psychology of sport. I was interested in the mental side of performance, and I had been for several years. And the success that I had in golf, I attributed a lot to the mental side. And so I think I was primed to be interested in psych, but I didn't take psychology in high school, and I hadn't done psychology until that intro psych class. And so I was primed.
You think the content would have struck you without the instructor?
Probably not as much.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not as much. And then I think we were speaking at the conference in Portland, and we were talking about intrinsic motivation, something we can come back to if you want.
Yep.
And my second psych class, after I had this one that kind of held my attention, I'm like, well, that was kind of interesting. Let me take another, because I need more distribution or whatever. And I took a class from Mark Lepper, who was one of the founding people who did intrinsic motivation research back in the 1970s. And he was very different. He didn't quite pop the same way this other professor did in intro psych, but there was just this genuine interest that just showed really clearly through him. And I just was really compelled by pretty much everything he had to say. And then he describes his intrinsic motivation research, where under certain circumstances, you offer adults and children rewards and they're backfiring. You get less interest, you get less successful problem solving, you get lowered self-efficacy or whatever it is. And I remember seeing that and just going, what? How does that work?
Yeah.
That just didn't compute. And it like made me really curious. And I think that's the thing that I try to honor, I guess, or share with my students as well. Like what I think my enthusiasm is fanned by what I'm curious about. And there's still a lot in psychology I'm curious about.
We talk about in psychology, we talk about all the myths, right? There's been books written about it. A lot of people approach their course that way. It's a nice way to start day one with the general psych course, right? Is to talk about myths. But I don't see that one show up on the list. And yet it in the last, I would say 5 years, and we talked about this a little bit, intrinsic motivation has been like a resurgence of like my curiosity into psychology again, because it's not something that I studied. In fact, because I always had the freedom to cut content in my general psych course, motivation and emotion was one of the sections that I would just leave out. And so I never really took a dive into it.
And as have I. I'm the same in my intro. Same thing. But what I have done for many years is I talk about pretty early on steps in the scientific method. Like what does a typical psychological scientist do as they try to pose and then answer questions for themselves? And I show the book I'm using, and as well as kind of this outline I have, says here's the common steps. They start with an observation, and then they try to explain it, and then they create the whole hypothesis bit. All this. And then what I do is I say, here's what I want to tell you about, but let me give you some research examples that could kind of illustrate how it works. And so I start by talking about cognitive dissonance findings that in many ways were the inspiration for what became intrinsic motivation in the 70s. The cognitive dissonance people talked about the under-justification effect, where you get people to contradict themselves and they can't explain it. And you can get them to change their attitudes. And that's a pretty robust finding. And then I still remember Mark Lepper showing this very odd graph where he's kind of showing what happens as you apply force to people's intentions and whether they'll flip or not. And he basically showed that these intrinsic motivation people just sort of asked the inverse, as in, if you could under-justify a behavior, well, what would it look like if you over-justified a behavior? And then that led to those initial studies where they were showing under certain circumstances, rewards were counterproductive.
Yeah, it's such a good hook for students because, and it brings authenticity to the classroom from a student perspective, because now they can think about something that they're motivated to do, right? And how that works itself out with them. I think probably better even than cognitive dissonance, because cognitive dissonance seems like such a barrier to students. Just the basic understanding of it. It's pretty complex, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it takes my students a long time to kind of read through that. But intrinsic motivation, something like, hey, what you thought would happen didn't happen here. Let's talk about maybe why, right? Yeah. Where are you at with it? Because you and I did talk about intrinsic motivation. Where are you at with it right now? How are you thinking about it? Is it Is it in your teaching? Is it in your, we'll talk a little bit about the work that you do outside as well. But
sure.
What do you think?
Where is it? I think it's still there. I mean, I think my interest in kind of the psychology of interest, I guess you could say, is still there. The modern day version, as near as I can tell, of intrinsic motivation is self-determination theory.
Yeah.
Which is DC and Ryan at Rochester, I think, University of Rochester. And they've sort of, Mark Lepper, my mentor, sort of did a bit of intrinsic motivation research and then sort of focused on other things, and he went elsewhere. But they've really stuck with it. It feels like for 40, 50 years now. And they're very clear on kind of these contextual variables that drive it or foster it. Autonomy, kind of a sense you're an active agent. Mastery, kind of gaining a sense of competence. And then it's interesting, I think their initial theorizing used to talk a lot about purpose, which I actually think a lot more now than I ever used to. I mean, once again, we're kind of back to mission statements and things like that. I'm paying more attention to values in the context of like habit change and behavior change than I ever used to before. But their new concept that's kind of replaced purpose is this idea of connectedness, relationships. And that if you're related, and again, you have a sense of agency and also a sense to kind of develop and progress at something, that these environmental factors, almost in a behavioral kind of way, they allow that intrinsic motivation that potentially lies within all of us to operate and thrive.
It's interesting how it breaks down like what humanists have kind of alluded to so theoretically for so long. And it's sort of the science behind it. So maybe there was an intuition that this is how it worked. And now we see some of the good science that can back up some of those things.
The thing that I have tried to do, and I think I could do a lot more with this, but one of the things that was recommended out of that science was give people appropriate choice. And so when I have, like, there's one writing assignment I have in my intro class, I've had it for a long time. I think I was listening to one of your other psych sessions interviews, and it was with somebody who was involved with Scientific American, right?
Yeah. Coco Valentine. Yep.
Yes. And so I love those articles. I've used them for years. And so what I do is I very intentionally, here's 3, pick your favorite one and tell me what you thought about it. So the choice piece figured into how I laid that out, just to kind of give the students a sense like you're choosing what to follow up on.
That's great. I too have done more and more of that. In fact, my intro psych course online, and I haven't implemented this yet in person. I got to think about how I'm going to do that because I am teaching in person in spring quarter. But online, I will now have students. Don, we're going to talk about outcomes for intro psych too, but that makes me smile right now because I know where we're going. But but for the themes of psychology, I used to try to get students to learn all those themes. I was like really going for it in my course. And I realized this is just the same thing I was doing with content 10, 15 years ago, right? So like 7 themes.
Content 2.0. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So now I have them do 2 assignments where they're basically looking into the themes. And then I have them commit to so that's maybe week 1, week 2, but on week 3, I have them commit to their favorite theme that they want to follow for the rest of the course.
I like that.
Yeah. And so in these online discussions, and I use video discussions, they all do the same assignment every week, but it starts with, here's my theme, and I've chosen this thing that fits my theme. So they're explaining it to somebody else, right? So this is great. That works really well. What I found that doesn't work for choice, and I think there's probably research on this somewhere, is that if you ask students to do something out of the box, or if you give them like 10 options that are out of the box, but the 11th option is like a PowerPoint presentation, they will pick the PowerPoint presentation, right? Like they're not going to do beat poetry instead, right?
Yes.
I think they think that they might not get a good grade if they take a risk or something.
I think that's another growth edge I'm seeing. A bunch of my colleagues are now giving much more choice in terms of the format of what an assignment looks like for when it comes to them. Yeah. And I think that's where I need to get out of my comfort zone a little bit and make room for some of that.
Well, this is where ChatGPT or whatever AI is so helpful, incredibly helpful. My classes have become so much more interesting just as my prompts get better of what I'm asking for, like, hey, I want to do this sort of thing. And then it spits out 20 possibilities based on what I was asking it, and things I would have never, ever thought about, and now have become implemented in my courses. So,
yeah.
All right. So if people have not looked at the IPI, the Intro Psych Initiative, the IPI put out recommendations for outcomes for the introductory psychology course.
Yep.
And then Don, people have approached this in many, many, many different ways, but I like the movement that everybody's kind of working towards this. Hey, let's have a common sort of way that we teach this course, so that students all across the United States and maybe the world are getting a similar experience in psychological science. Now, but the problem is that there's still 14 different outcomes from the IPI, and they exist under these three categories of basically content, scientific thinking, and then themes. Can you just tell me, how did you and maybe your colleagues together, how did you all approach this? Because I think it's kind of unique.
Yeah. So I guess maybe a little backstory there, as I think is happening at most institutions these days. Assessment is kind of being reemphasized and rethought. I think kind of what qualified as assessment of, oh yeah, I got the sense I know what my students are doing, we're all right, or they could be better, or whatever. That sort of vague impression isn't cutting it, and is not what, at the very least, accreditation is expecting these days. So we've been doing a lot of work at Shoreline these last few years, trying to reconceptualize what it means to have good learning outcomes for our courses, and how do you know what it is your students know? I think that's the question that kind of, because I think the problem we've had is that people will look at some of these attempts to change as just sort of more bureaucracy, and I don't want, just let me teach, just leave me alone.
Yep.
But I had a colleague who kind of said, don't we want to know what our students know? And I still remember this. We've had some really good people involved with assessment at Shoreline, and one of them was kind of saying, well, I do my grades. I know how my students are. I got my grades. But if you have several learning outcomes and you see a grade of, I got 3.0 at the end, how do you know which of those outcomes they knew and which maybe they were fantastic in two and horrible in the others? You can't tell. So you got to be better at your assessment. So we've been getting more specific of coming up with cleaner learning outcomes, ones that are more accessible. And then against the backdrop of this, I'm familiar with all the work you did with the Intrinsic initiative. And you have some really nice, the ones that go with content and the ones that go with kind of thinking like a scientist. Those were the ones that we paid the most attention to. And then we're moving at Shoreline. One of my other roles at the college is I'm the faculty co-chair of the curriculum committee. So we see degree revisions, program revisions, course revisions. We're the final stop before we make a recommendation to the VP of instruction. And so I'm seeing a lot of work that my colleagues are doing, kind of revising their courses and getting better learning outcomes. And so one of the pieces of advice we've been hearing more is less is more with outcomes too, because what we're trying to create is kind of a culture, or even just a system, where we're regularly updating our courses and collecting data about how our students are doing. That this just kind of becomes a loop that we keep rolling along and doing going forward. And historically, when I started at curriculum, we had courses that sometimes had like 20 or 25 learning outcomes in their master course outlines. And so from an assessment standpoint, you're like, how can you assess all those in some kind of reasonable cycle? I mean, if you started now, maybe you'd finish by the time you retire, but it's kind of ridiculous. So what we're seeing now is a lot more learning outcomes for courses that are more sparse, like 3, 4, or 5. And what I did when I looked at the work you had done is like, well, what if we just went with those top 2? What if we just master some psychology content and learn to think like a psychological scientist? And those were the 2 kind of that we put in for the spaces where the learning outcomes go. And then in the notes for the course proposal, we put all the other resources that are in there. We put kind of the sub-outcomes that are underneath those that you referenced, as well as the themes that people can pick and choose from as they want. So that's sort of the route that we went.
So those are not student facing. The students see the two, right?
Well, they see the two, and then the rest of it is more for the faculty to decide how they want to use it. And what I envision we may do is kind of maybe on alternating years, like one year we may assess content, another year we may assess thinking like a scientist, and then go back and forth. And then we might emphasize some of those sub-outcomes underneath those large headings in different years. But then we're still sort of covering the breadth of the course as we've specified it.
Yeah. I had so many thoughts right now. My mind just blew up and went blank.
You gave rise to what we thought. So thank you. But
I don't know. Hey, my kiddo just came in here. Hold on. Let her know that I'm here.
No worries.
Hey, Dad, I'm just on a call. Okay. Can you not go in your room for about 20 minutes? Yeah. So don't go in the room. We just got I brought home a brand new cat today, and it's in her room. And this cat right here, I have another cat, and she hasn't figured out that she knows something weird's going on behind the scenes. But that's why I was like looking out the door earlier. Like, is my cat losing her mind right now? Anyway, thanks for that. So
enjoy the surprise tonight. That sounds great.
I know. I know. Okay. So here is where my mind goes. Okay, I'm going to back up. I heard about something called authentic assessment about maybe 6 years ago, something like that. I'm probably late to it, but whatever. But I remember like my dean saying something about authentic assessment. And I was like, first of all, it was like buzzword. But second, what does that mean? Okay, authentic. So I went and looked it up, tried to understand what it was. And somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong. But in what I remember was actually, however I read it and understood it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we should do with students. Authentic assessment meaning it's meaningful. Mm. It makes a difference in their lives. It might represent real life. It's so great when you can start to think about your students' learning and the assessment that is happening as authentic assessment. I think it's just like a superpower in your teaching. How then are we approaching assessment of outcomes for like accreditation or for the college inauthentically, which I think has been my problem with assessment for so long? I remember being like a very new, naive sort of faculty member and looking at outcomes and being like, that's ridiculous. That like, how would you like, I didn't know anything about anything, but there was something that didn't feel right about that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The outcomes we had. So we've been doing a lot of revision at the course level, but we've also done kind of college outcomes too, Shoreline student learning outcomes, we call them now. And so what we had before were these incredibly complex and sophisticated outcomes. They were very aspirational, probably almost wishful. And most of the time we had no way to tell whether anybody had done them.
Well, you would spend, for sure, there's people who spend hundreds of hours trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Probably to not be successful in the end at actually doing it. Right.
Exactly right.
And this is the problem with, I don't know anything about assessment from that level of, but I can see us spinning our wheels. I was most recently in a meeting at just maybe a week or two ago where we were talking about things, and I had that feeling in me again, like, what are we doing here? Like our premise is wrong. There's something wrong. So you did remind me of a question. How does Shoreline then, how do you assess if the courses you are teaching are meeting the college-wide outcomes?
Yeah, that's how, that's a work in progress, I think.
Okay.
We are trying, I think, to move more towards alignment. I think we're doing some stuff like course mapping, where we're trying to, I think, visualize what the college is wanting when, say, somebody leaves with a degree. And then what do we see them doing before then, like program-wise, certificate-wise, and then eventually course-wise, that sort of connect with those. And we're trying to do some work both with college outcomes, and then we've actually got some transfer degree outcomes that we've created too.
Interesting.
Which they're odd beasts because we didn't create the transfer degree. It's kind of like, here's the transfer degree you're doing. and there's so much variability that's within it. It seems a little strange to have outcomes, but we still have them. But we're trying to connect the vision there back to the level of courses that either, here's where this idea might be introduced that speaks to a transfer outcome or a college outcome. Here's where it's reinforced, and then maybe here's where it's assessed. And we're actually looking, I'm kind of intrigued to see if this is going to play out. We're looking at some software that integrates with Canvas that may allow faculty, when they create an assignment, to add a little extra rubric in that then connects that assignment that they're doing already as part of their evaluation of students and probably would have done anyway, but it actually connects to what the college is looking for in terms of its Shoreline student learning outcomes.
Oh, interesting.
So the idea there would be really a nice economizing of effort, I think, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
I know it's expensive. We'll see how it plays out. I know these times are tight financially, but I think that's, if we can at least get the alignment, even if we don't have the fancy software, I think we can be collecting information from faculty that they're already collecting anyway as part of doing their work as faculty.
Yeah.
And then we can get some better data that speaks to what students have when they leave the college.
Man, what you are doing, well, and maybe I think other people feel this as well, but I think it is that you all are really forward thinking on this. I think it's where we've got to end up going this way. And maybe it's different. Maybe my 4-year teaching colleagues are thinking, hey, that wouldn't work for us. But at a 2-year community college, I don't know. That's all I know. And so I know what doesn't work. And for me, what doesn't work is that we have these kind of 4, soon to be 5 college-wide outcomes, which are amazing. They're very, very cool outcomes, very thoughtful. It's exactly what I'd want. If my kid was graduated from Cascadia College, I'd hope that they would have, accomplished all these things. But they require those 5 outcomes to be in every course syllabus and to have multiple outcomes underneath those. Wow. And so you're almost trapped. They don't require multiple outcomes out underneath, but yeah, that is the status quo. And so I would say probably at Cascadia, the average course is going to have, anywhere from 10 to 15 outcomes in a course. And so, and then, that's not a battle worth fighting, I don't think. But I do also wonder why we don't look at our colleagues over at other community colleges who are doing things. And I'm sure we do. Somebody's doing that. But why?
Well, most of what we're doing, we've been stealing from other people too, because I think we've been a bit behind and we're trying to catch up. And I think we've done a good job. Yeah. But we were a little slow to the game ourselves.
Would you say your institution is pretty open to trying some new things?
I think so.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's nice.
There are these pressures, from accreditation and all of that feel a bit rigid at times. But I think there's still room for academic freedom and for people to experiment. Yeah. And at least at the level of curriculum committee where I sit, we talk a lot about, okay, here's the outcome for a course, say, but you get to choose how you go about satisfying that. And we're trying wherever we can to give our faculty the freedom to do that.
Right. Yeah.
There's the choice theme again, by the way, that connects to motivation that we were doing earlier.
That's nice to have a psychologist making that decision. Very good.
It truly is a psych session, isn't it? Yes.
Absolutely. Okay. So I want to talk about a couple things. I want to get into where do we want to start? Okay. So you grew up in Seattle then?
Yes. I grew up in Edmonds. My parents still live in the house that I grew up in. Yes.
Gosh, do they have one of those great houses that looks at the water?
They have a view. They're very fortunate.
Those are my dream houses. So that's probably 2 miles from me, right? Over here in Mount Lake Terrace. And gosh, folks, if you ever come to Seattle, do not miss Edmonds. It's a little secret. They don't want you to know about it. But go down to Edmonds to the water. It's true, isn't it? They don't want people to know about it.
I didn't know how good it was till I left, I think.
Yeah. So, okay. So
it's a nice little community. Yeah.
So you grew up in Seattle. What high school did you go to?
I went to Lakeside in North Seattle, kind of right there by Jackson Park Golf Course.
Well, that's convenient for you.
It was. Very fortunate. Yeah.
Did you play golf there at Jackson?
That's where our team would practice.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah, they still do. I still see teams there all the time.
I used, when I was in grad school at the UW, I was the golf coach for a few years. So I came back and helped out a little bit that way.
That's fun. So what's the secret to number one? You just want to get it as close as you can to the water and then pitch over. Is that it?
Yeah, number one, I think the secret there is just get through the hole. It's kind of a mess with the way they designed it. When I played there in high school, it wasn't that way. And then they kind of did the whole redesign for irrigation and flood control. And that's why that lake is there now. Oh. And it's a very awkward starting hole.
It's a very awkward starting hole.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a really good lakeside golfer. He's actually, I think he's turned pro now. He's trying to make it out there. So he's very good. And his strategy in the first hole was just hit driver in the lake as far down there as he could, drop it, knock it on the green, and sometimes make 4, which would be a birdie, or sometimes make 5, which is a par. He just didn't even worry about the lake. He just said, that's going to go in sometimes. It's a stupid hole. It was a very interesting strategy. I've never heard someone say that before, but if I
could hit it into the lake, which I can't, maybe I would. All right. So you, Seattle kid, how did you, or I guess, where was undergraduate? Your undergraduate?
Undergrad was at Stanford.
Yeah.
And I was recruited there to play golf. I had a tuition scholarship there.
Wow. So what kind of handicap are we talking here?
I have, what am I right now? I'm a little better than the +1 right now.
I was going to invite you to golf, but I'm not going to anymore.
No, let's play. That'd be fun. Yeah, I like playing with anybody. Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's pretty cool. So how does that come about for student athletes? Do you look at places you have you think I'm pretty good at this sport? And do you have to put it out there, or are they coming to you at that for golf?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, today's landscape is probably different. Mm-hmm. I look at what's going on today, and it looks like the Wild West. It's kind of a very strange environment. But I put together kind of a portfolio. I had kind of letters of recommendation from local golf figures, if you will. And then I had kind of all my results from my kind of 4 years of serious junior competition. My parents introduced me when I was 5. It was kind of a babysitting thing. They didn't want to pay for a babysitter, so they took me to the golf course instead. Excuse me. And then when I was 9, starting when I was 9 years old, they created a junior golf association. And every summer after that, it was just golf was what I did. And my record was good enough. I was very successful locally, and then I did well in a handful of national and regional events. And I got on the radar for Stanford. I was playing in a tournament in Minnesota, and I got paired with the defending champion in the opening rounds. And the Stanford coach was watching the defending champion, but came away kind of surprised with me. And so that kind of put me on the radar for him. And then I was fortunate enough to get in there and then get to play for 4 years.
Wow. So you were doing an engineering, you were doing an engineering degree at Stanford when you started, or then, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's what I sort of, what didn't compute, there were several things. I found engineering to be really challenging. I worked my butt off and felt like I got B's all the time, which was frustrating. And then as I was moving past the prerequisites, I saw what was ahead, and there were all these lab courses that had labs in the afternoon. And that's when I was supposed to playing golf. That's when the golf team goes year round. We show up, when I was playing, we would show up before the start of the academic year, usually play a tournament before things got going. And then we'd play all year long. And then the NCAA championships, if we made them, were during finals week of spring quarter. I kept track. I think it was my junior year. I missed 30 days of class, and I was gone from the university 45 days that year. Because we had 2 home events, which was more than most teams, but every other event is an away. You go to play an event in Chicago or Florida or California.
Sure. And everybody goes, right? Yeah.
So our team, well, actually you had to earn your way into the 5.
I meant all the golf teams that are in.
Yeah, and all the teams. Yeah. It's kind of like a track. It's like a track meet or a cross country meet, right? Yeah. That's more how its format is. And I sized that up, and I'm just like, how is this going to compute? It didn't compute to me. I've seen a couple other people come through Stanford after me who did masters. They did engineering degrees and were all Americans. I'm like, wow, I'm impressed. Like I wasn't sure I could do all that.
Wow.
So I was hesitant in looking at that. And then the psychology courses I mentioned earlier showed up, and then my interest kind of shifted elsewhere. And so I figured, okay, this is going to be easier to manage with a sport obligation. And then I also liked it more. And so then it was a win-win as far as that goes.
Right. Okay. So then you make the switch into psychology at some point. What year was that?
So let's see. I think I did my first 2 years kind of prepping, doing the engineering pre-major work. And then starting my junior year, I shifted and declared psychology. So I declared late. So I was kind of catching up. For my last 2 years, it was kind of all psych all the time, it felt like. But I really liked it. Obviously, Stanford had a great psych department. Zimbardo was there, and Bandura was there,
of course,
all these people were there. Tversky was there, so it was kind of like, holy crap! I mean, I didn't know who they were at the time, but now I'm like, oh my god.
Did you have any classes with any of those folks?
Many of them. Yeah. I still remember. I worked in the lab of a professor who's still there. Her name's Laura Carstensen. She's a gerontologist, and she did some video stuff in her lab, and Zimbardo was going to give a presentation at a conference, and he needed to make a video of the Stanford prison study. And my mentor asked if I would help him make the video. And so I did. We sat down for like 45 minutes, and it was ironic because the day I sat there, which would have been 91, it was anniversary to the day of when he had started the Stanford prison experiment, because we were looking at the video and it showed the date and I'm like, hey, happy anniversary. And he kind of went, nah. And we went on and made the tape, but it was kind of funny. Yeah.
Interesting. And you know the Louise Chim connection with Stanford. Louise Chim from Tip Northwest. She's on the steering committee, and she went to Stanford as well. So we've got a couple of you.
And then who's at Duke?
Bridget Hard also.
She's also from there. Yes. I've talked to her a little bit about it too.
Yeah. Fascinating. So many good teachers came out of there, which is so interesting to me. So then how do you decide to come back to Seattle to go to UW? Yeah.
So I competed in college golf for 4 years. I got pretty good. I lettered all 4 years. I was an academic All-American my last 2 years. But I don't think, at the time, I didn't think I had enough success to kind of go to the next level. I was also getting pretty burnt out. It was ironic that I knew about intrinsic motivation. It was getting kind of squished. And Mark Lepper had this paper that he wrote. It was something on turning play into work if you're not careful. And that's kind of what happened to me at the end of my golf career. I left really burned out. And I decided that golf was not going to be a professional option for me. And then I kind of, well, now what? What do I do instead? And I still had this interest in psychology. And I was kind of like, well, what if I go to grad school? I mean, you had these high power graduate program at Stanford there. And so I still remember my mentor, one day she said, yeah, I think you'd make a good clinician. And I'm like, really? Like, what made you think that her impression of me kind of that landed? And so I applied. I probably applied to places I had no business applying to. Most of them I was rejected at. I think I applied to like UCLA and Yale and other big schools like that, and I was rejected. But I got in two places. I got into a small school in the East Coast called Brandeis University, where Professor Teresa Mobley was there, who was an intrinsic motivation researcher, and she's really well known to this day. The Harvard Business School picked her up eventually, and that's where she works now. She was a student of Mark Lepper's, and my undergraduate thesis was based upon her work. We tried to see if we could immunize kids against the negative effect of rewards, and we found we could achieve some effect of that. So we did that. And then the other place I got into was the University of Washington. And what appealed to me there was there were two people doing sports psychology work. And it was arguably my longest shot because the UW clinical program was ridiculously competitive. But I think I was a good fit for the interests of my mentors. And so I was fortunate enough that I got in.
Wow. So you finished that up. You're a clinical psychologist. Well, I mean, I guess you graduate, but then did you go on and get licensed as a clinical psychologist?
I did not.
Okay.
I did not. So I'm trained as an adult clinical psychologist. At the end of it, though, I did my internship. I did an internship at Arizona State University. And when I was all done at that time, there was still like another 1,500 hours of supervised work that needed to be done that you couldn't pay the supervisor for because that was a conflict of interest. And I already felt like I jumped through a bunch of hoops to get to that point. I'm like, how do I keep doing this? And then I went, I think I like teaching more. Mm-hmm. Let me go see if I can teach. And so that's kind of where that fork in the road came.
So did you teach at the UW?
I did as a graduate student. And then I taught there a little bit afterwards as well. I taught, I taught methods a little bit. I taught personality a little bit. I taught a Psych of Excellence class, which was kind of an applied sports psychology class that got broadened. I taught that for several years. And then I taught briefly in the UW extension program that was kind of a performance program that they created. It had a strength and conditioning piece, sort of an injury prevention piece. And then I did mental training for athletes. And people would take one of those courses a quarter and get a certificate in some kind of performance at the end. That program was discontinued a number of years ago, but I did that for a few years too.
But those experiences were formative, right, for what you're doing, since then.
Very much so.
Yeah. And so then if we're following a timeline, you come back from ASU and then you apply to Shoreline soon after that, right?
So I started teaching part-time there. In probably 2001, after I think I taught at Highline, taught a little bit at Brandeis there on the end of Lake Washington. I think I was at Shoreline for a couple years, and I was hoping, I mentioned a colleague earlier who retired that he had founded Shoreline. He'd been there like 30 plus years, and I was kind of lingering, waiting for him to retire. He didn't retire, and then my wife and I are expecting our first child. And I'm like, I gotta take a job somewhere. And so I applied for and I got a full-time job at Tacoma Community College. And so I took a job. I worked with Pam Costa down there.
Wow.
And then I felt really badly because in the middle of that year, I get a call from my colleague at Shoreline saying, guess what? We've got a new position. I'm like, where was this last year? And I kind of remember head in my hands walking to the dean down there saying, I'm going to apply for another job. And they were very graceful and understood. And I was fortunate enough to get to come back to Shoreline, and that's where I've been ever since.
Wow. What a wild story. You couldn't have predicted it. Hey?
Yeah.
I mean, you leave as a high school student, you're leaving and thinking, this is the best. I'm going to become an engineer and I'm going to play golf.
That's right.
Yeah.
Teaching was not on my radar as my career.
Right.
In retrospect, it is, I see it in my family, like particularly my mom's side. Her brothers were also teachers. Hello, Kitty. But it wasn't something that I was thinking of. And yet I hope, again, there's nothing else I really want to do other than what I'm doing right now. So it's worked out really well. I'm very fortunate.
Well, so yeah, you enjoy teaching, which is really great. After, a couple decades of doing it, but tell us about what else you are doing with kind of from the sports psychology angle.
Sure.
Right now. Yeah.
So I mentioned that my mentors were sports psychologists. And when I started at the University of Washington, I came at a very opportune time. The football team had just won several Rose Bowls. And so they had a lot of cash, shall we say, flowing through the athletic department. And shortly after I arrived, the athletic director approached my mentors and asked if they would create some sort of sports psychology program for Husky athletes. And my mentor said, sure, we'll be the directors, but we want our graduate students to be the people carrying out the actual work. And so I was one of the first two people to staff that program. It was called Husky Sports Psychology Services. It was around for about 5 or 6 years. I phased out to get ready to go on internship. And then I believe within a couple years, the timing was weird. They were going to lose a bunch of people at the same time and have to be replaced with brand new, fresh graduate students. And the athletic department, I think, was disappointed with that. And so it kind of fell apart for a while. I know they've had consultants there on and off since then. I would assume or hope they have one right now, but I don't know if they do at this point. Mm-hmm. Wonderful experience, though. I had an office in what was the old Husky crew house. I would see athletes there, do performance enhancement work with them. I would work with coaches. I would work with teams. I had relationships with trainers. Really amazing window. And then I had a mentor, my mentor, Ron Smith. He was a consultant for the Houston Astros for, I think, 13, 14 years. My master's work was actually with the Astros minor league baseball teams. We measured mental skills within them and then found we could predict various success indicators in baseball by looking at those. So when my brush with fame is right after I graduated, I was hired by the Seattle Supersonics NBA basketball team to be their consultant. Unfortunately, within the year, Clay Bennett took ownership of the team. And then a year after that, they were the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I wasn't moving to Oklahoma City. So be it.
Oh, I remember that was so painful. What a time for us.
A bunch of sports fans in Seattle groaned. Yeah. But I got to kind of rub shoulders a little bit with some of the elite of the NBA there for a brief period. What I've done since then is I work with people who find me. I don't really market myself a whole lot. It's kind of word of mouth. But people find me who are interested in doing mental game work. And then for whatever reason, in the last couple of years, there's been a little bit of an increase because my name got into a couple circles and I've had a bunch more people than I've had before. So outside of Shoreline, I do kind of one-on-one mental training work with athletes to try to see if I can help them improve various aspects of their mental game.
Very selfish question. Any hockey players that you've worked with?
I haven't worked with a hockey player. I've worked with quite a few different athletes. For whatever reason, I'm in the world of fencing right now. I've never fenced in my life, but a whole bunch of my athletes are fencers. One of my first clients was a fencer, and it kind of rippled through her, and I've created a little bit of a name for myself in a certain pocket. I've worked with bodybuilders, volleyball players, a few golfers.
Yeah.
Soccer players. I mean, I had most of the sports at the UW. I saw athletes on most of those teams. So it's a cool way. I guess what I tell them is I have like a philosophy and a set of tools I know about. And if you help me understand just the gist of your sport, I think I can help you connect what I know to what you need to do. So I don't necessarily have to know what it is you do and be proficient with it.
Sorry, I cut in on you. Can you share like just a couple of pieces of your philosophy or anything that you might want to share? You don't have to give away your whole system.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Let's see. I would say originally there were sort of two things I emphasized a lot in this work. One was sort of this question: what do you like when you're at your best? Thinking of what experiences you have. What do you notice in terms of thought or lack thereof? What do you notice physically, strength-wise, ease-wise? What do you notice concentration, attention, focus, those kinds of things? And while there are some individual differences, in general, when most humans thrive, there's kind of a common cluster of attributes that show up. Energized, but relaxed kind of captures a lot of it.
Lose track of time.
Yep. Confident. I mean, it has a lot of overlap with flow.
Yeah.
Flow and this peak state are very similar. And so I ask people to get very familiar with that space, with the goal being of ideally having it occur for them more often. You can't really force it. You can't make it happen. But if you set up the right preconditions, you can sort of fall into that space more frequently. Sure. And a lot of mental skills, the way that I think about them, they're designed to help you increase that odds of falling in, if you will. So for instance, many people, when they're at their best, like you kind of said, they don't think a lot. It kind of feels automatic. Well, what if we talk about your routines? What if we talk about your rituals? What if we talk about your systems? Let's get intentional about those so that we can make major parts of your performance more automatic. And that's kind of giving you a little bit more influence over that part of the optimal state. So psychological state, what do you like when you're at your best? That's one foundation piece. The other thing that I have historically spent a lot of time attention on as well is what are successful performers like from a mental perspective? How can we take stock or compare and separate people who are, Hall of Famers or world champions or whatever they might be from people who are less accomplished. And what sports psychologists and other researchers have generally found is just like some people have amazing physical skills that enable them to do things that others can't. Many times, successful performers have certain mental habits, certain ways of thinking about things, ways of absorbing failure, ways of trusting themselves, maybe even ways of getting into that flow space that we talked about a moment ago. And if we're clear on what it is those people do, let me see if I can do the phrase right. By studying those who, are the best, anybody can get better, I think is an idea that really appeals to me, because we can see what they're doing. And if I do what the elites do, it may not mean I can do exactly what they do, but I like to think of it more as it's like a contest with yourself, and can you get more out of yourself? And if you can do that, that's a lot of what success at least means in my mind.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then, of course, the intersection with intrinsic motivation to do it, because it's costly to do some of those things, right?
Yeah.
You have to really want it.
Yeah. But not want it too much. And what is it that you want to do? Because if it's sort of wanting outcomes and results and performance ends, those are difficult to control. And by their nature, if we invest too much in them, it doesn't often work out that well. I'm intrigued. I think there's quite a bit of overlap with this science of peak performance and success and kind of the science of happiness, if you will. I've heard a number of people who are pretty well versed in the happiness science say that what you're really looking for is you don't want to, have the goal of being happy. You want to let happiness ensue. Right? Yeah. You go about your life in a certain way, and then happiness is like kind of this byproduct, if you will, rather than the goal you're shooting at. And I think there's a lot of similarity to what high-level performance, when it's at its best, looks like.
Yeah, and it's funny, I'm thinking about parallels in business that they would call some of these things lead measures. Mm-hmm. Like, so you're not actually aiming for the goal, you're aiming for the things that predict the goal.
Exactly right. The lagging and leading indicators, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So one of the people who was very influential early on in sports psychology is a guy named Jim Loehr. And there's a book he wrote that I read that this was kind of my Bible in college. It was called Mental Toughness Training for Sport. And Loehr has gone on, and what he does a lot now is corporate coaching. Because I think what's happened is people have recognized that the principles you would introduce athletes to be successful, they're not that different than what anybody would do. Business, music, school, to get more effective. And I teach a course once a year at Shoreline called The Psychology of Excellence. And that's kind of the theme of that class. It originally was an applied sports psychology class. And to be fair, there's plenty of athletic examples still littered through it. But we intentionally, when we modified the class years ago, and I did this when I was at the UW, we tried to point out how it could apply to other places like music and business and school, or whatever area of your life that you happen to care about. So, I was... years ago, I gave a talk that aired on UW TV for a while, and it aired nationally. There were people who came up and saw me and said, "Oh, you gave that talk. I saw it in Kansas City." I'm like, "What?" Anyway, there was a person at a pharmaceutical company who saw it and hired me to do some sessions with his sales force, because he thought those same principles that I was talking about with athletes would be relevant for them too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fascinating, Don. So good. I'm so glad that you are taking, these passions and then just merging them into all these kind of expressions with students and with, business leaders and also with athletes. It's just very, very cool to see. I think it's one of the gifts of moving into from kind of mid career into late career is that you realize what you've got on your hands and how to express it in ways that people are going to find useful. I mean, maybe you were doing this the whole time. Early career, were you doing all this, or did something shift for you?
I think to begin with, at least right out of grad school, it was teaching. That was more than enough just to figure out how to do that well enough. But one of the reasons I chose the the degree I did was because I felt like it gave me some options. And I like this idea of, well, I could also do some performance coaching and sports psychology on the side. And now that my kids are in college and I've got a little more space for myself, I have a chance to kind of wear a few different hats. Like it sounds like you're doing yourself.
Yeah. Well, it is absolutely energizing to do those things. I'm having fun. It sounds like you're having fun. And we've gone over time. So that means that's good too. So, Don, thanks for having this conversation. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that we didn't? Anything that you want to promote or tell people about? Exciting stuff, whatever. I
can't think of much. I mean, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah,
I'm honored that you wanted to speak with me, and this was totally enjoyable.
Well, I'm so glad we finally got to do it. And let's go. I mean, we live close to each other. Let's go grab a coffee, or maybe we'll play the first hole there at Jackson at some point.
We can skip it sometime too.
Okay, that sounds great.
And I know we spoke about this in Portland too. We were interested in talking about some kind of module that maybe we could insert into an intro psych class that might have something to do with intrinsic motivation.
I would love to do that. Although I feel like I'd just be riding your coattails because you know so much more about it. However, sometimes it is just nice to work on that with somebody who shares the passion, right? For this thing. So yeah, we should think about that. We're going to put a positive psych course on the books at Cascadia College.
That's great.
Yep. And I think that there is, that's the thing about motivation is it really can work its way into so many different, like from an excellence course to a general psych course. And then really I think that one of the greatest benefits of a topic like that is you can actually help students with it. Yep. You can actually help people with it.
Going back, this might be a decent thing to end on. The mission statement stuff you had us doing at the Intro Psych Academy. What historically I've done is kind of this mental training, performance enhancement, habit change work has sort of found its home in my Psych of Excellence class. What I think has happened, and your academy helped facilitate this, is it's got me thinking about how does this apply to all the psych classes I teach. Yeah. Not that it's going to be the focus of them all, but sort of this, what threads from here can I pick up and maybe just scatter throughout everything? I think that'd be worth pursuing on my end.
Well, I think I'd like to have that same conversation with you because I want all my courses to be more meaningful. Yeah. I have yet to bring mission, like that workshop, I have yet to bring it into my courses because I haven't quite thought through where it fits. I know it fits somewhere, not quite sure where. So, hey, if you want to kick around some ideas, let's do it.
That would be exciting.
All right, Don, thanks for joining me today. And folks, that's Don Christensen from Shoreline Community College. And if you have a professional athlete in your life, reach out. Thanks. Hey, everyone, Garth here. Thanks for listening to Psych Sessions. If you could go to wherever you listen to our podcast and you would follow that podcast or like it, it really does help us as we are trying to get out to more teachers of psychology. Also, if you haven't checked out our website, please visit psychsessions.org and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We offer free resources and valuable news that you are going to want to know related to the teaching of psychology. Thanks.